report from Michael Grange came out today that has a lot of Toronto Raptors fans frustrated, as it indicates the team could be running it back with a very similar roster going into next season. So we'll discuss the contents of this report in this video, as well as whether or not it should be taken seriously by Raptors fans, and if it's all true, if it's all gonna happen what Michael Grange is saying, should we be sounding off the alarm, screaming out that we're the next Washington Wizards and the next decade of Raptors basketball is just gonna be a horrific watch for Toronto Raptors fans. So we'll break it all down in this video. So let's first dive into the first little snippet that's getting pulled from pretty well every NBA Twitter account, NBA Reddit account, as they're pulling the snippet that's coming from Michael Grange that's saying that breaking things up and selling them off for parts has never been seriously entertained in private conversations he's had with Toronto Raptors front office executives. Publicly, the stance hasn't been that different. The Raptors don't see themselves as that inferior, if at all, to the Miami Heat, who have made the NBA Finals two of the last 4 seasons, the lowly New York Knicks, who made the second round this year, the Sixers, the Bucks, and even the Boston Celtics, who have proven themselves to be beatable under the right circumstances. So, given the season the Toronto Raptors just had, and all the teams that were just mentioned made the playoffs, made Eastern Conference runs, faced off, had much better showings than the Toronto Raptors had this most previous year, it's an unfortunate quote to come out, as even though I don't think it's all that crazy, in the sense that I think the Toronto Raptors have a lot of talent. You look at the track record, the history, right? At least over the last decade, right? This team has certainly been an upper echelon team and, since the 2010s and all that, but in the last 3 seasons, certainly haven't proven that out there on the court, even though they do have some good players, some good young talent and all that. Comparing the Raptors with the Miami Heat at this point, sure, you can look at it like this. The Miami Heat were also in the play-in tournament. They were 1 quarter away from essentially having the same season outcome as the Toronto Raptors, getting knocked out in the play-in tournament by the Chicago Bulls. But they didn't. That's the difference. The Miami Heat found a way to win. Heat culture. The Toronto Raptors, they're always talking about having the winning culture, having the winning mentality. Regardless of what issues, what problems are going on, it's next man up. You deal with everything internally and you get wins. You find a way to get some W's. And the Toronto Raptors haven't been able to do that. The Miami Heat, they dealt with the adversity and they made the NBA Finals. We can't compare our culture right now with the Miami Heat because they have found ways to win. The Miami Heat have been dealt some of the most ugly contracts in the past decade. Pat Riley's throwing out money to Hassan Whiteside, Tyler Johnson, Dion Waiters. Heck, even Kyle Lowry's grossly overpaid. Even though he's the GOAT, I don't want to disparage the greatest Toronto Raptor of all time. But at his age, $30 million per season is a horrific contract for him. Pat Riley is dishing out, dealing with all those situations, lots of big personalities in the locker room, and they have found ways to win. They have made the Eastern Conference Finals 3 of the last 4 seasons. The Raptors, in the past 4 years, cannot compare themselves to the Miami Heat. They cannot compare themselves to the Boston Celtics. The Celtics beat us while we still had a GOAT that was relatively in his prime, while we still had a championship core on this roster. And then, you know what they did while we were sort of tanking and not making the playoffs or barely getting 2 wins in the postseason against a beaten-up Embiid? Do you know what the Celtics are doing? They're making the Eastern Conference Finals, making the finals, and that makes me sick to my stomach. But we can't compare ourselves with the likes of the Heat, with the Celtics. Sure, the Sixers, even the Sixers have had more playoff success. And Joel Embiid's allergic to the conference finals. We can't compare ourselves with those teams right now, right? Regardless of what direction you want to go in, what decisions you want to make, how you want to quantify the players, the talent on your roster. You can't look at it like, oh, the Raptors have a culture of winning. We have not proven it. That needs to be fixed through roster construction, through coaching, through all the things we've been discussing over the past few weeks, over the past season. Right? Regardless of the guys we want to keep, the guys we want to let go. So that's one thing that has frustrated a lot of Raptors fans. It's gotten a lot of the Toronto Raptors in general roasted by NBA fans. The fact that we're sort of comparing ourselves to these upper echelon teams in the East when we really haven't been on that level. And I'm not one of those guys saying trade everybody. That Fred needs to go 100%. Pascal needs to go. OG needs to go. That's not my take. But my take is, if we run it back with the same quarter group, we can't be relying on Raptors culture to turn things around, right? That's not been working over the past 3 seasons. So, especially with Kyle Lowry gone from this team at this point, who is really the embodiment of Raptors culture, we need to shake things up a little bit. Something needs to happen. We can't run it back with the same team and hope things change with the new coach. So that's the initial thing that's gotten people fired up. We have a lot of clippings that we have to take from this article. The next thing that Michael Grange sort of dives into is saying that what he's hearing now is that they're not going to trade anyone from their core, said one league source. Said another, it wouldn't surprise me if they run it back. There's a lot of holding and waiting going on. Ignoring whether or not they should or should not, the challenge is exactly how they would do this and pay the good players market value while avoiding the luxury tax that will kick in when cumulative salaries are above 162 million. So basically, league executives that Michael Grange has talked to expect the Toronto Raptors, despite all the reports and the rumors and reports from other established reporters as well, not just the random rumors from people making stuff up on Twitter and all that, right? Like, the actual reports that have come out, the discussions going on about these picks and all that, right? These executives believe that things are going to just run it back. We're going to have a similar path to what we had at this year's trade deadline. And again, I just went on a little tirade. If this team runs it back with the exact same group, the exact same core, I don't care if there's a different coach sort of involved. It just didn't work last season. And maybe you could look at it like, oh, they need a training camp to sort of mesh and gel and get the vibes right. And sure, you can argue that all you want, but unless we get some serious leaps forward in terms of development, this roster as constructed just doesn't have enough shooting. We don't have the depth to actually run it back. And given the contract situations, if we do decide to run it back with our core, we're only going to come into next season with a much more depleted roster, as Michael Grange sort of dives into. Basically saying that Fred VanVleet will be looking for a starter salary in the $30 million per year range. Pirtle is expecting roughly $20 million, and Gary Trent Jr. will be declining his $18.5 million, and he's not going to come back cheap either. So, that's a lot of money to be throwing at a core group that couldn't make the playoffs last season, and basically goes on to say that there could be some creative solutions in order to negotiating lower first-year salaries, no longer deals, for example, but it's hard to see the Toronto Raptors not having to shed some salary. It would be nice for someone like Otto Porter Jr. to get his money off their hands, but that would require attaching draft picks to a player who has negative value to convince someone to take him on, as nobody in the NBA wants Otto Porter Jr. He's frail, and he's always a layup away from being out 6 to 8 weeks. So even a guy that's making $6 million on our bench next year has no shot of leaving, apparently, as no one in the NBA wants to bring in a dude that's just not going to play any games. So I'm still an Otto Porter Jr. believer in the sense that I think he could be valuable to this team if we're competing and he can somehow stay healthy like he did with the Warriors, but it is a massive risk that we gave. Well, it's not massive. It's not a massive contract, but no team is going to take that liability off our hands, at least at this point. But other things the Raptors could do is no easier to pull off, but we'll be trading Chris Boucher in his 2 years at roughly $22.5 million. Ideally, we'll be taking back minimal money. The problem there is you would no longer have Chris Boucher, who's hardly a perfect player, but will be a useful bench piece at his price on this Raptors team that lacks depth. And this builds on my point, on my little discussion I had at the beginning of this video. If the Raptors do decide to run it back, and they have to cut Chris Boucher and attach another draft pick to Otto Porter Jr. just to run it back with a group that couldn't even get out of the play-in tournament, right? We would be coming back with a worse roster. Guys like Chris Boucher, the minimal depth pieces, right? The minimal bits of consistency, and Chris Boucher is not that consistent, right? But the minimal pieces we had of it would be gone. We would be digging ourselves bigger holes than what we had last season. It just doesn't make sense. We've run with this core for the past 4 years. We had a glimpse of light, a glimpse of encouragement, especially when we were hoping that Scottie Barnes and Gary Trent Jr. would take major leaps forward. In Scottie Barnes' second season, Gary's third season with the Toronto Raptors. That didn't happen this most recent year. Our team regressed. Like, we can't just be hoping and praying to run it back with a worse roster that things are just going to magically turn around with a new coach. So there's that situation going on. And, certainly the Raptors have signaled publicly and privately that they intend to keep Fred VanVleet regardless. Failing to do so without gaining significant benefit in return would be a colossal screw up from a front office that doesn't make those kinds of mistakes. So, again, Michael Grange is sort of putting it out there that Fred VanVleet, the core guys, are likely to return. The front office guys discussed, or the initial reports in this article are saying that they don't expect the Toronto Raptors to trade away any players. Well, Fred's not going to get traded. He's a free agent. And bringing him back at $30 million per year, I mean, if there's no other option at point guard, the $30 million is a ridiculous number for Fred VanVleet at this point. Just given, I guess that is his market value. I'm not a Fred VanVleet hater. I do think he's had the career reputation of a guy that should be getting a serious bag this offseason, but just given how things went last year, his injury history, the way he slowed down on the defensive end, he wasn't able to really lead this group the same way a guy like Kyle Lowry did at the point guard position. He doesn't facilitate the same way, right? He doesn't get people going. He has games where he's a good facilitator, but games where he's just sort of looking to shoot himself, and his lack of clutch buckets, his 39% on 20 points per game in the last few seasons. Like, you can't be giving him $30 million. I want to be pocket watching. I don't want to be doing this. But my favorite team is handcuffing them to a guy that it just won't work out for. It's not the move at that price point. So Michael Grange basically saying, oh, that's the route. Like we just saw, especially with the cap situation becoming a lot more strict in the coming seasons, the Raptors are going to be paying so much money for this mid-level team. And no one's going to want these $30 million mid-level players when the cap is going to be a lot more grueling on these teams. We're going to have to attach assets in order to get rid of Fred VanVleet if he stays at this level and the team doesn't improve. That's just the reality of it. So take the Bradley Beal example we just saw with the Washington Wizards as a warning that we can't be throwing out overpays, tremendous overpays to, run it back with a mid squad. And it's gotten me broken a little bit because I love this team, and Fred individually, I don't mind him on this Raptors roster, but just given the money situation, I don't feel like it'll work out. But, I don't think Fred is a cancer to this team or anything like that. I don't think Pascal is one of those guys, but this needs to be shaken up. The money situation doesn't work. The construction doesn't work. The lack of shooting doesn't work. Even our lack of defense at times doesn't work. And it's an unfortunate situation for this squad. I don't know. Basically, to close out this Michael Grange article, saying that said, there are no indications the Raptors are even entertaining offers for Siakam at this stage. And given the team is taking on, given any team is taking on Siakam or OG Anunoby for that matter, would likely have assurances that a signing contract extension would be a formality. It's kind of more than that. It's the kind of move that would be hard to keep under wraps, to keep completely under wraps. So, he just ends it off with that, saying, the Raptors 3 free agents, they're probably coming back. We're going to overpay for those guys. And then our only chance at getting back different assets, shaking up this roster a little bit. There's not even discussions going on, at least according to Michael Grange, or no indications on that front. I don't know. The other reports say otherwise, and we all know Michael Grange this time of year tends to get stuff wrong. And Masai Ujiri has been known to throw Michael Grange under the bus as the smokescreen. Grange reported a couple seasons ago that we're drafting Jalen Suggs right before we drafted Scotty Barnes. So he could be the sacrificial lamb to Masai Ujiri. Maybe they have a blood pact where Grange takes down some bad reporting, frustrates a lot, maybe not frustrates, but throws out some misdirections to Raptors fans, to other teams in the league before the NBA draft, so Masai can come in with a big swerve, right? Maybe they have an agreement on that front, but I don't know. It's got me in a weird place right now, and I just can't wait for the NBA draft to happen to see what actually goes down regarding this offseason. It should be a fun one for the Toronto Raptors, but let me know what you guys think about this report regarding this team. I had to go on a little rant in this video, so you guys are the best for making this far. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.